April 1986. An explosion tears apart the Chernobyl nuclear reactor, unleashing a poisonous atomic cloud. Tens of thousands flee the area. A whole city is abandoned. The causes of the worst ever nuclear catastrophe have been fiercely argued for decades. But now, a cache of new evidence, the top-secret files of the Soviet KGB, will reveal a story no one even suspected.
Я хотів би зауважити, що саме на Чорнобильської АЕС працювало 17 агентів і близько 50 довірених осіб.
The KGB files contain warnings that the atom plant was like a huge time bomb. But Soviet leaders ignored them.
Мы говорили правду. Единственное, что мы не могли, комитет госбезопасности не был всесилен.
Chernobyl is still highly radioactive today. A scientist will investigate the actual control room where the explosion originated.
The dose rate here is quite high. We're fairly close to the nuclear fuel that's still inside the reactor unit.
This new evidence finally draws back the veil of secrecy to reveal the untold story of the world's worst nuclear disaster. Chernobyl was the horror story that scarred an entire generation. An explosion and nuclear meltdown. A cloud of deadly fallout blanketed much of Europe and was detected throughout the world.
Weathermen had predicted that the winds would bring the cloud over Kent and East Anglia late today, and they say it'll drift slowly northwards up the coast.
It caused, at the minimum, 5,000 cases of cancer, with more being reported even today. The decontamination effort required 500,000 workers and helped bankrupt the Soviet Union. Whole districts were abandoned. Farmhouses lie derelict, any crops still too dangerous to eat. But the chain of events which culminated in the explosion in 1986 goes back many decades. To the Cold War at its coldest, when Russia paraded its nuclear armory through Moscow's Red Square. The new evidence shows that the accident was born of post-war Soviet isolation and paranoia. That's what led the KGB, the world's most feared spy agency, to place its agents inside Soviet nuclear power plants. Serhiy Plokhy grew up in Ukraine. Now he's a professor at Harvard University and author of a history of the Chernobyl disaster.
The people who created the Soviet nuclear industry, those were the very same people who built the bombs in the late 1940s and early 1950s. They genuinely believed that unless they built the bomb, they would be bombed themselves by the United States. They were second to get to the bomb, to the atomic bomb. But they were first to build a reactor that was specifically designed to produce electricity. So that was 1954.
In Kiev, the ancient capital of Ukraine, evidence is emerging which shows how anything linked to nuclear power became a state secret. Inside the dusty archives of Ukraine's secret police, a historian has been allowed access to the top secret archives of the former KGB, including their files on Chernobyl. Oleg Bajan was a freshman history student when the reactor exploded. Like many Ukrainians, he felt the true story of the disaster had been hushed up. But now the Ukraine government has allowed him to study the formerly secret files, which throw light on the time when Ukraine was still part of the Soviet Union.
І зрозуміло, що з початком будівництва Чорнобильської АЕС було створено Чорнобильський районний відділ КДБ, який, власне, і опікувався роботою, і діяльністю, і побудовою цього стратегічного об'єкту. Звичайно, коли ми говоримо про Чорнобильську АЕС, то це був стратегічний об'єкт, який був підпорядкований саме атомній промисловості.
The Chernobyl nuclear reactor was the type the Soviets called the RBMK. There was a good reason why it was classified. RBMK reactors could also make the ingredients for an atomic bomb.
It was top secret in terms of the design because it was a dual-purpose reactor that was used to produce electricity but could be used to produce plutonium or weapon-grade uranium. That's why it was all covered by secrecy. The government body that developed the first RBMK reactor was the ministry responsible for Soviet nuclear bombs. So Chernobyl, from that point of view, it's a sad irony. It almost was designed to explode.
Chernobyl lies 100 kilometers northwest of Kiev, 700 kilometers southwest of Moscow. The vast Soviet Empire lay mainly to the east. In 1970, the Soviets chose a remote area that had been nothing but farmlands as the site for the power plant. But the huge Chernobyl workforce would also need somewhere to live. The city of Pripyat, specially built to support the nuclear plant, numbered 50,000 citizens at the time of the disaster. Their brand new city made them an elite group in the Soviet society. One of them was Marina Sivets. And this woodland walk was once one of Pripyat's busiest streets. Marina's husband was a metal worker at Chernobyl.
Припять был молодежный, светлый, белоснежный город, город роз, город молодых людей, город будущего, город рай, город песня. На каждого жителя Припяти был куст роз. Вообще цветы были кругом, на всех улицах. Просторный, веселый, современный город, ну, на тот час современный. Все были возможности для работы, для отдыха, для жизни. Все было замечательно.
Pripyat had grown in line with the power plant. First 1 reactor, then 2, 3, and 4. But evidence now shows that something had been hidden from Chernobyl's workforce. A design flaw inside the reactor, known only to a small group of scientists, meant that Chernobyl was in reality a giant time bomb. The opening of the Chernobyl nuclear plant in 1977 was hailed as a triumph for Soviet science and technology. But right from the start, there were worries behind the scenes. according to the top-secret files of the KGB, their agents were desperately concerned about safety at the nuclear plant.
Я хотів би зауважити, що саме на Чорнобильської АЕС працювало на початок 1980-х років 17 агентів і близько 50 довірених осіб. Тобто довірені особи – це які не отримували платню за ту чи іншу довідку, а просто ті, які були небайдужі до ситуації і симпатизували саме радянським спецслужбам.
The KGB's famous initials simply stand for the Committee for State Security. They were a secret police and spy agency, headquartered in the infamous Moscow Lubyanka building. Their Chernobyl branch was there to detect potential foreign agents or saboteurs. But they also picked up disturbing gossip as building continued.
Concrete was laid improperly. It had not been properly mixed, resulting in cavities and splitting. These defects can lead to accidents in the future.
Another document questioned whether Chernobyl's cooling pumps could cope in an emergency and made a simple but chilling observation.
The design of the reactor also does not provide for a safety containment.
Dr. Claire Corkill is a British scientist who has studied the Chernobyl disaster. She agrees with the concerns of the KGB.
The RBMK reactors were extremely popular, and that was because you could build them fairly cheaply and you could operate them pretty much non-stop. And for that reason, they were built all over the Soviet Union. Now, one of the main things that you can see on these reactor units is that there's no real containment building. You can just see a thin outer shell. Most Western reactors have some kind of very thick concrete containment.
A secret KGB report from 1983 listed 3 Soviet nuclear plants built without a concrete safety shield.
The Leningrad, Kursk, and Chernobyl nuclear power plants are currently the most dangerous in terms of their further operation, which may have threatening consequences.
The same report pointed to Chernobyl's lack of an emergency cooling system if the primary system ruptured. Without that, it said,
at the epicenter of the accident, radioactivity will be 60 times higher than it was during the explosion of atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
It wasn't only the design which worried the KGB.
Комітет держбезпеки підрахував кількість аварій, які мали місце у період з 1979 по 1982 роки. 27 аварій і декілька десятків – це зупинок атомної електростанції.
Radioactive particles have been discovered 5 kilometers away from the plant. They pose the greatest danger, since if they enter the human body, they can cause serious illness.
Як виявилося, що саме ця доповідна записка буде відправлена до Москви, але там ніяк не відреагували.
The KGB's network of spies, secretly eavesdropping among the 5,000 nuclear workers, meant they missed nothing. A scheme to make money using the warm but oftentimes radioactive reactor cooling water to grow fish to sell at market also broke the safety rules.
Спецслужби б'ють в набат, що ця риба є, по суті, шкідливою для людського організму, тому що у ставку охолоджувачу вода є забрудненою радіоактивними відходами, що в такий спосіб не можна заробляти і робити певний бізнес.
The KGB's top-secret memos kept arriving in Moscow. But no one there was listening to their growing alarm.
Мы говорили правду. Единственное, что мы не могли, комитет госбезопасности не был всесильным. Понимаете?
There was no appetite high up to hold work or revise procedures because the bosses had production quotas to meet.
The general managerial culture in the Soviet Union comes from the 1930s under Stalin, where either you meet the target or you can be accused of being a saboteur and go to prison.
The KGB had spelled out the problems. Chernobyl was badly designed, badly built, badly operated. But what happened to unleash the disaster? The science of nuclear energy is complex. The principle behind it perfectly simple. Chernobyl's RBMK reactor was no different from any other in its basic design. A continuing controlled nuclear reaction inside tubes in the reactor core generates a massive amount of heat. This heats the water in another set of tubes. The water turns to steam, which drives the turbines to make electricity.
There's absolutely no difference between a coal-fired power station and a nuclear-fired power station, except for where you get the energy from. So when you split an atom of uranium, you get about 1,000,000,000 times more energy than you would get if you burned a carbon-carbon bond in coal. After that point, the heating of the water from that energy that's released and the turning of the turbines to create electricity is exactly the same in a coal power station as it is a nuclear power station.
But harnessing the most powerful force in nature requires constant monitoring and managing.
Also inside of the reactor, we have what's called control rods. These are really important. These are like the brakes on the nuclear reactor. They slow down the nuclear reaction so that we can have some control over how much energy is being released.
These control rods, inserted from the top of the reactor, reduce the heat emitted by the uranium. Withdraw them, and the heat builds back up again. In November 1975, a critical design flaw in the RBMK reactor was revealed.
I'm stood right on top of an RBMK reactor, Chernobyl reactor unit number 3, which is identical to the one next door, Chernobyl reactor 4, which exploded. I'm standing on top of the bioshield. This is a very thick steel plate. And underneath each of these small squares that you can see, it's either a fuel assembly where the nuclear fuel lives, the control rods, or the pressure tubes that contain the water and the steam that are used to generate electricity.
The crisis occurred not at Chernobyl, but 1,000 kilometers away at the city then still known as Leningrad. There, RBMK Unit 1 came close to catastrophe.
When the control rods were fully exerted from the reactor, when they were put back in again, there was a spike of reactivity. And this was because the control rods are tipped with a material called graphite. They were tipped in this way to try and help lubrication. Now, the problem with having a tip made of graphite is that graphite actually increases the reactivity. So when the graphite tips first enter the reactor, they could increase the reactivity and cause a spike.
The engineers in Leningrad pulled their reactor back from the brink. But this critical design flaw, common to all RBMKs, was too sensitive to be made widely known.
The information was top secret. That information was never passed to the people now in the civil sector of the nuclear energy. They didn't have the right clearance. The government officials didn't believe that actually they were supposed to know too much about the reactors that they were running.
Chernobyl today is still populated by hundreds of engineers working on the long-term cleanup program. Their time inside the plant is strictly controlled because of high radiation levels dating from the explosion more than 3 decades ago. It was on April 26, 1986, that the design flaw inside the reactor would wreak terrible havoc. Mykola Gorobachenko came on duty shortly before the explosion, monitoring radiation levels in the reactor building. He's returned now to recount his experience.
Я заступил здесь на смену 25 апреля в 23:50. Здесь сидел мой напарник. Я там стал в тени, и произошел взрыв. Сколько-то секунд, может 10 терять. Второй взрыв, свет погас. С того вентиляционного приточного люка понесло черную пыль. Эту дверь у нас раскрыло на коридор.
Moments before, the crew of Control Room 4 had been carrying out a scheduled reactor shutdown test. The explosion came as they began the shutdown procedure.
This deployed all of the control rods. The insertion of those graphite-tipped control rods caused a huge increase in reactivity, and that ultimately led to the nuclear reaction running away.
Still reeling from the shock, Mykola set out to discover what had happened. Within moments, he knew there had been a catastrophe.
Посмотрел, блок разрушенный, парит, звездная ночь.
Mykola headed for Control Room 4, and he does so again now. It'll be the first time he's returned there since the night of the disaster. For years, KGB agents inside the Chernobyl power plant warned that a terrible accident was likely. On April 26, 1986, their warnings were proved correct. Reactor number 4 exploded, destroying the building in which it was housed. Because of radiation levels in the wrecked space of Control Room 4, it's still only safe to remain there a short time. Mykola Gorobachenko made his way there, in the chaos following the explosion.
Светилось, звенело. Я доложил начальнику смены Акимову за обстановку, что это. Дятлов тут, Анатолий Степанович был, он не поверил. Я говорю, что разрушено все это самое. Он не поверил.
Mykola went in search of casualties.
Вышли мы на 27-ю отметку, причем пробирались это там темный, как говорится, ужас, кругом темнота, пар, пыль.
He and a colleague came upon a body. It was their friend, engineer Volodymyr Shashanok.
Живой нашли. Лежит на боку кровавая пена со рта. Руки, ноги целые, ты в сознании. Но он кивнул головой, да. За руки его подмышка оказалась на моей, я на плече, а рука по спине туда так и след остался тоже. И этот так же самое. Вот так вот мы волоком его вытащили оттуда.
The explosion had echoed for miles, and flames from the reactor building now lit up the night sky.
И въезжают пожарные машины на территорию станции. С сигналками пожарные машины едут. Пламени такого огня не видел. Все парило и развалины, знаете, парит.
Petro Khmel was head of a fire crew from station number 2.
Ну, поднялись мы быстренько на отметку 12-ю. Ну, я вижу, там пламя, такие куски горят. Вот. Тут, говорю, давайте ці куски тушимо, тому що був третій блок. Щоб це плам'я не перейшло, нам треба збити огонь. А коли вже було часа 5, разведнилось, я посмотрел на эту крышу мазала, то, конечно, самого передернулось. Думаю, как мы не провалились туда вниз вообще.
Marina Sivets was 25 at the time of the explosion. She worked managing a dormitory for 500 nuclear plant employees in Pripyat.
Вот где-то часов 5 утра дежурная поднялась ко мне в комнату, разбудила, сказала, что на станции авария, ну, нужно выходить, и, в общем-то, всех собирают внизу. Ну, что-то конкретно так и никто не объявил. Просто сказали, вот авария технологическая, про ядерный взрыв никто еще не говорил.
In Kiev that morning, telephones were starting to ring.
Где-то около 6 часов утра мне раздался звонок о том, что произошла какая-то авария от дежурного по Комитету государственной безопасности Украины. Когда я спросил о характере поражения, в общем-то мне сказали, что пока неизвестно, думаем, что это не атомное.
Mikhailo Sakharash served first in the army as an officer surgeon. After joining the KGB, by 1986, he was in charge of medical affairs for the whole of Ukraine. Early that morning, a more accurate picture of the disaster was already circulating among Soviet KGB high-ups. One of them, 2,000 kilometers away.
Однако буквально через 30 минут мне позвонил мой коллега из Дагестана, с Махачкалы, и сказал: Михаил, у вас произошел ядерный взрыв, по сути дела, взрыв Чернобыльской станции, которая имеет может иметь тяжелые последствия. Поэтому надо защитить людей, во-первых, и особенно детей. Мы готовы принять тысячи ваших детей, потому что мы понимаем, что это глобальная катастрофа.
A document from the KGB dossier, drawn up just hours later, reveals how Pripyat was instantly cut off from the rest of the world.
In order to prevent information leaks, the spreading of false panic and rumors, outgoing mail and long-distance phone lines are now under control.
А в общем-то, наши люди уже в 6 часов утра 26 числа были в реакторе, возле реактора. Изучали, там, нет ли это катастрофы какой-то, которая обусловлена террористическим актом и так далее, и так далее. Ни один человек не сказал «нет» или «я боюсь» или так. Садились и ехали в зону.
In Pripyat, 4 kilometers from the plant, citizens had been told very little about the scale of the disaster. Children played outside. Even a wedding went ahead as planned. It seemed like a normal Saturday. But Sunday would be different.
А 27-го, где-то перед обедом, вдруг радио, значит, включилось радио местное, и диктор местного радио начала объявлять периодически, что на станции произошла технологическая авария, жильцам, значит, нужно покинуть город на 3 дня. Я взяла бутерброды и пошла. Думаю, на 3 дня. Ну, где-то мы остановимся, переждем и вернемся.
49,000 people were herded aboard a fleet of more than 1,000 buses. 36 hours after the explosion, Pripyat was deserted.
вспоминая свою первую поездку 28 числа, это необыкновенно тяжкое воспоминание. По пути я обратил внимание на то, что ни одного живого существа. И когда я ехал и видел, где-то белье висит постиранное ранее, и так. И ни одного живого существа, ни птиц, ни собак, ни кошек не увидел. Представляете, я.
If the people of Pripyat were told very little, the rest of the world had been told nothing at all. But this was a secret that couldn't be kept much longer. As the KGB warned, the lack of a blast-proof shell proved disastrous when the explosion came.
That lifted this steel plate clean off the reactor, through the reactor roof. And this hole in the roof obviously was the place that allowed the particles and the radioactivity that was caused from the subsequent fire to be released into the atmosphere and then spread all across Europe.
Winds blowing from the south carried the radioactive cloud far beyond Ukraine's border.
The first news came not from Moscow. It came from Stockholm.
On Sweden's east coast stands the Forsmark nuclear power station. Like all such installations, it's filled with radiation monitors to check whether its workers have been in contact with dangerous radioactive particles. On April the 28th, 2 days after the blast, an early arrival was chemist Cliff Robinson.
I came there quite early in the morning, before anyone else, almost, so to say. And I had a habit of eating breakfast there, and then afterwards I used to brush my teeth. And at this washing room, to get out from it, you had to pass a radiation monitor. And the alarm rang, and I didn't understand anything because I hadn't even been inside the controlled area of the power station. So they came and told me to measure myself once more. And I did, and the same thing happened.
Before they could even explain these first alarms, the crisis escalated.
There was a huge line of people standing there, and nobody could get through. The alarm just rang all the time.
The workers had been contaminated, not by anything inside the nuclear plant, but by something on the outside.
I asked one of the guys standing there, can I borrow your shoe? And I took the shoe with me to the lab and put it on a detector, and I will never forget the sight of gamma-emitting nuclides from this shoe. Very radioactive. Suddenly the alarm went. They evacuated the whole power station.
By lunchtime, a scientist in Stockholm had begun analyzing wind and weather data to locate the source of the nuclides on that shoe.
We had a meteorological system running, which made us in a fantastic situation to immediately tell what it was. We could see a track where the radioactivity had come from, because we had just to look into our computer and all the thing was there. In the beginning, we thought it came from Lithuania, but the track continued backwards to Černobil.
Soviet bosses, including Communist Party leader Mikhail Gorbachev, could no longer hide what had happened.
The 9 o'clock news from the BBC.
Good evening. The Soviet Union admitted this evening that there's been an accident at one of its nuclear power stations, and it said there'd been casualties. It's believed to be the first time Moscow has admitted such an incident, and the way in which the news was given suggests it's a serious one.
In the USA, there was skepticism about Soviet claims.
From their Washington embassy today, Russian officials told the Americans that the disaster was under control and casualties were light.
Their conduct was reprehensible in not reporting to the world, as well as to their own people, the dimensions of this disaster.
Within 24 hours, a top-secret CIA memo predicted the political fallout for the rulers of the Soviet Union.
If there is widespread death, illness, and dislocation, this event will be a severe psychological blow to the Gorbachev regime and its gospel of optimism.
The report was very insightful. They were talking about the impact on the Soviet economy in general and on the Soviet standing in the world. The fact that they were silent for 3 days was one more proof for people like myself who lived at that time in Ukraine, that of course they're lying.
The Chernobyl disaster was now making world headlines. But the Soviet news blackout meant Ukrainians could only trade rumors of what was really happening. And now the regime would act to shut those rumors down. The Chernobyl explosion of April 1986 presented KGB agents here in Ukraine's capital, Kiev, with a new set of priorities. To discover what citizens knew of the disaster 100 kilometers to the north, who was saying what, and to who.
Target Jester, in conversation with his wife, said that martial law is established in the region. People are being shot on the spot for looting.
Rumors like those were completely groundless, but in the absence of believable official information, they spread like wildfire.
Everyone felt that they were affected. Everyone wanted to know truth about what happened, whether this is safe or not, and that information was not coming from the government.
Target Golda, in conversation with her daughter, said, "We have hundreds, thousands perish, and human life has no value."
Alla Shapiro was a doctor in Kiev, a specialist in children's blood disorders. She heard about the disaster via foreign news sources.
My dad, every night, he was listening to the Voice of America, or BBC, as Soviets call them, enemy radio station, because he didn't trust Soviet news. He called me at 2 in the morning. He heard from Voice of America that explosion at Chernobyl occurred.
The doctor and her colleagues guessed there'd soon be an influx of patients suffering the effects of radiation. But they got no official briefing. In fact, the information the medics needed had been quickly hidden away.
We were absolutely desperate to get any information. The professor from the clinic where I worked asked me to stop at the National Medical Library and gather just basic knowledge about radiation. The librarian told me very openly that they received an order from above to take all the books that would contain the word radiation. So there was nothing on the shelves. These orders came from government officials. The less knowledge, less panic. This was default thinking for the Soviet government. This was a catastrophic event, and they applied it to this as well. They just didn't want panic.
But the KGB files reveal how the information vacuum turned out to be the best place for panic to develop. There were thousands of foreigners in Kiev, many staying in approved hotels, and the KGB had them under surveillance.
Йшлося про те, що туристи вже довідалися про те, що Київ потрапив у зону радіоактивного зараження. І багато хто із іноземних туристів просто-напросто прагнули полишити місто Київ. Але спецслужби все робили для того, щоб ці панічні настрої, які панували серед іноземців, їх ліквідувати.
One of the Americans targeted by the KGB was 27-year-old Hank Birnbaum from Idaho, leader of a group of American and British students. He was at the Mir Hotel, where the KGB eavesdropped on his safety briefings to the students.
At 6 p.m. of the same day, he gathered the group at dinner and misrepresented the information received during his talk with the chairman of the bureau, Comrade N.I. Kushner.
Hank Birnbaum is now 62 and lives in California. He didn't know the KGB had a file on him.
He hid from participants of the courses the fact that there was no danger and misrepresented the information received during his talk with the chairman of the bureau, Comrade Kushner. As a result of the heated debate, 50 people voted to leave the USSR. Those were kind of pointed charges. I would think I made an effort to represent the different perspectives, but
Hank and his party of students quit Ukraine, touching down first in London.
British and American students were flown out of the disaster area into Heathrow last night to a joyous welcome from relieved relatives. They described conditions in Kiev before they left.
I don't think they know how serious it is, the majority of them.
Though the students themselves were given a clean bill of health, some of their clothes showed higher levels of radioactivity, and these were confiscated and taken to the National Radiological Protection Board laboratories in Oxford for detailed examination, which could reveal more information about the nature of the radioactive material still leaking from Chernobyl.
The toxic clouds hovering above Europe were easily visible. Something no one had glimpsed, but could only guess at, ensured the crisis was about to enter its most dangerous phase. It was feared that tons of intensely hot molten material underneath the twisted wreckage would ignite a further vast explosion.
The very high temperature of the nuclear fuel melted together with the cladding and various other parts of the reactor building, caused this radioactive lava material, like a volcano, to ooze down underneath the reactor.
The superheated material burned through the concrete base layer. Chernobyl was experiencing a meltdown. Dr. Korkil's team have replicated the Chernobyl lava to understand what happened inside the damaged reactor. It's a substance known as corium, minus only the deadly radioactivity.
What we've done is melt some uranium and concrete and those other materials that were inside the reactor. We've heated it up to a temperature of about 1600 degrees C, which is quite close to what happened in the Chernobyl accident. What we're going to do is pour the lava just to recreate what happened as the nuclear fuel melted down from the inside of the core of the reactor all the way through to the basement. You can see it forming some bubbles there. This is what happened in those moments after the accident.
The Directly underneath the reactor lay a reservoir of 20,000 tons of water, kept there for emergency cooling. But now this water could itself act like the explosive in a giant bomb.
There was a real concern at that stage that this very high temperature material would hit the water and it would generate lots of steam, which then would have gone into the atmosphere and been spread very widely.
Someone needed to enter the pitch-black reservoir chamber and open the water valves. Someone ready to put their life on the line. Outside, radiation was beginning to spread across an entire continent. The KGB had failed to prevent the disaster. Now, if this suicide mission failed to prevent a second explosion, the result would be a catastrophe on a truly global scale.